It's great to be here. I'm Carrie James. Savannah introduced me well, but of course, the work that I do is in deep partnership with my colleague, Emily Weinstein. For over a decade that we've been doing research on teens and screens together, we've been doing it together. We've also been doing separately. I'm a sociologist by training, and Emily is a developmental psychologist. So that combination is really powerful. So we really bring individual level lenses as well as bigger picture perspectives to the work we do. And this evening, I'm going to be giving you a mini tour of key insights from our book, Behind Their Screens, What Teens Are Facing and Adults Are Missing. But I want to start with work of art. And this is a work of art that's not in color in our book, but it is the first page of our book. And it's a painting. It's an Okay, I'll proceed. It's a painting. It's an optical illusion. Maybe you've already noticed that. At first, you might recognize that this is Vincent van Gogh from his famous self-portrait. But if you shift your perspective, you can see that his ear is the hat of a girl in a long blue dress, and his nose is a seated man, maybe it's a farmer, looking across the landscape. His eyes are buildings out on the horizon. His eyebrows are the roofs of those buildings. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with teens and technology? We all have our own assumptions about social media, and we have lots of strong feelings about it. But my goal for this evening is really to help you shift your perspective a little bit, to change what you see, so to speak, about the topic of teens and screens. In short, there is much more than meets the eye at first glance. So that's our starting point. Today, I'm going to share insights that really shifted Emily and my perspectives and gave us a new motivation to rethink how and what we do to support young people in today's digital world. For over a decade, we've been chasing answers to a bunch of different questions. I'm highlighting just 3 on this slide. What's it like for teens to grow up in a world with 24/7 connectivity? More recently, we've had a particular interest in what's hard for adolescents and why, like especially what's hard about growing up with social media. And crucially, this is like the key question for all of us in this room, is how can adults better understand and support kids around what's hard? First, we need that understanding, and then we can get to better support. So I'm going to touch on all of these questions this evening, and I hope leave you with some actionable ideas, some things you can do about that last one. How can we as adults be more helpful? So let me give you a little bit more context for how we ended up doing this work. So over the last few years, Emily and I had an opportunity to work on this incredible study, and we were collaborating with our colleagues at Common Sense Media. You may be familiar with them. They do lots of ratings and reviews of movies and books. They're a go-to source for me as a parent. Can this movie be viewed by my child? Is it appropriate for her age? Or and they rank other qualities. So Common Sense is a wonderful organization. In addition to providing resources for parents, they also created the first digital literacy and citizenship. They did it in collaboration with us many years ago. We were collaborating with them again a couple of years ago to update the curriculum with the latest topics. And we decided that it was really important to understand more about what today's teens are most worried about, so that we could revise the curriculum in ways that actually met their needs. So we ended up doing a survey that generated a tremendous amount of interest. We ended up with this data set of over 3,500 responses from middle and high schoolers. And we had one question in particular that really just, the answers to which stopped us in our tracks when we started to look at the data. The question was, what worries you most about today's digital world? We had thousands of responses to this question from the mouths of babes. And frankly, even a decade into studying this topic, we were really surprised by some of the things that we were seeing. So we got to work digging into the data, lots of data, and we actually realized we needed to partner with teens, with young people, to really come to a deeper understanding of what we were seeing. So we recruited a teen advisory council of 22 teens who came from different communities, from different contexts across the US, had different identities. And again, Emily and I kept asking them, what are adults missing that you most need us to understand? So this was a really powerful kicking off point to our work. So today, I'm going to give you a teen level view of 3 specific topics that our research and our partnership with teens really helped us to see in a new light. These are topics that teens wish we understood better, that they wish we understood better and more from their perspective. So our book Behind Their Screens really covers these topics, but also a fuller set. We also cover sexting pressures. We talk about mental health and social comparison. We talk about civic and political issues and cancel culture. I hope that you'll check out the book if you're compelled by a topic that I'm not going to cover in this talk. And you can also feel free to ask questions about any of the topics from the book at the end of the discussion when we have our Q&A. So a couple of qualifiers before I jump into the details. First, I want to say something about the focus of our book and that question about what worries you most. And that's that, even though we focused on those worries and challenges, it's not because we think that social media is all bad. We're really interested in the challenges and worries because we recognize that the positives for teens are and can be so huge. We see this constantly. We see the upsides of technology for friendships, for finding social support, for learning, for exploring in their interests, for civic engagements. There are lots of upsides, but we really appreciated those upsides, but we really wanted to understand what was hard so we can really help our young people navigate a world that's complicated and it's not really going anywhere. So that's one qualifier. The other is our focus in the book is on teens, but regardless of the ages of the youth that you parent, I hope that you'll find some helpful insights. Okay, so let's dig right into the pull of the screen or digital habits. So managing the pull of the screen is a big pain point that I want to explore. And it might surprise you, but teens' worries about digital habits and the pull of the screen sound actually a lot like adults' concerns. So one 13-year-old told us, I feel like I'm too interested in my phone instead of what's happening around me. I wish that I didn't use my phone so much, which is really interesting if you hear from a 13-year-old. Here's another one. A 14-year-old said, it's just scary to think I only get one childhood and I could accidentally slip into a habit where I just wasted away on some pointless game. And let me just say, it's not that these were isolated quotes. These weren't the only 2 quotes in our massive data set where teens talked about this issue. We have worked with hundreds of teens in different contexts, and consistently we found that when the conditions are right, when they're not worried that we're going to take away their phones or impose new rules or be judgmental about what they're doing, young people will actually open up about worries like this, about worries that they actually have about their tech habits. The pull of the screen is also captured by this compelling idea of the digital pacifier. So some of you who still parent young children might think about this as the digital pacifier is when you give your kid a device so that you can make dinner, like your younger kid, your toddler who's sitting in a high chair or something like that. But teens actually talk about the concept of the digital pacifier too. But this is when they describe using their devices for a kind of self-soothing, especially in social situations where they feel awkward, but they want to appear busy, occupied, anything but awkward. Ironically, of course, using your phone in a social situation like that means that you're probably less approachable. It's probably less likely if you're nervous in a social situation, you don't know anyone, but it's less likely they're going to approach you if you're buried in your phone. So it ends up reducing the likelihood that we end up striking up conversations that would make us feel less awkward in a genuine way. So that's a really interesting concept, the digital pacifier. And of course, it's not only awkward feelings that pull teens to their phones. There is plenty of pull from what's in the device itself. So these technologies are intentionally designed with features that are meant to attract and hold our attention and keep us coming back for more. We all feel this. So think about features like autoplay. This removes the natural pause point that comes along with the end of a show or a video, where we might have time to say, that's enough, I've got to do something else. We see this on Netflix, on YouTube, all of those video sites. Infinite scroll. It used to be that you would get to the end of your news feed. If you used Facebook, you would get there, you would get to the end of all the new content, there was nothing more. And Facebook realized that if they just created infinite scroll, there was always new content, then that would remove a natural stopping cue. So we would keep going on and on. Of course, there are features like notifications that pique our interest. They offer the promise of something rewarding. Sure, they're often nothing of note. Sometimes they're spam, but that actually contributes to the draw. It's what psychologists call a variable reward schedule. And it's similar actually to what happens in gambling. You never know when a like or a comment might come, something rewarding, and it kind of keeps you on alert and looking for those red flags. And then, of course, metrics like likes are especially compelling for adolescents who are developmentally primed to be sensitive to peer feedback. And now they have the quantifiable kind that's available to them around the clock. So we are all vulnerable to these tech designs and to the pull of the screen. But teens' normal adolescent sensitivities amplify these pulls. In a way, technologies play and even prey on their developmental sensitivities. This is something we have to be alert to. One especially memorable conversation captured an experience for youth that we heard on repeat. So 16-year-old Graham was describing how dysregulated he can feel when he's browsing TikTok. When that happens, I asked him, how do you stop? And he said, I don't. Ever. During one of our Zoom conversations, Graham wanted to share with us how much time he'd spent on TikTok the prior week, but he didn't want to say it out loud in case his mom overheard from the room next door. So he typed it into the Zoom chat instead. 24 hours is what he wrote. So Graham, like many teens in our advisory group, in our survey data, resisted adults' attempts at regulating his screen time. He made it pretty clear that he didn't want parental intervention. He didn't want his mom to know he was looking at TikTok for 24 hours in a week, but it would be a mistake to think he wasn't worried at all about his own TikTok habits. Although the prevailing narrative is that teens want unlimited screen time, they actually do worry about it. Emily and I heard that again and again from them. So what can we do as adults who care about our kids and want to help them with these challenges? So adults often default to this us versus them battle with teens over screens, where we act like the referee, we blow the whistle when they're over screen time, or we issue a penalty when they've stepped out of bounds, used an app we didn't want them to, commented in the wrong way. But we've actually found that adults are much better positioned to deliver support if we recalibrate our roles and think of ourselves as more like coaches who support skill building and guidance and really strategize with our kids around the hard plays. So the idea of a coaching role actually gets us to a more us and them approach to screen time that really recognizes the battle against those persuasive design features I mentioned a moment ago is one that all of us are fighting. Again, adolescents more so because of their developmental sensitivities, but we all feel that pull to the screen. So we can be in an us and them approach. Another thing that you can do, and this is actually an evidence-based practice, is you can talk about those design features that I just named, talk about persuasive design. Talking directly about it with adolescents is actually an evidence-based practice. It can tap into teens' sensitivity to being duped or manipulated. Nobody wants to be manipulated. Nobody wants to think that they're being like tricked. And so highlighting how things that adolescents value, like their autonomy, their freedom to choose how they spend their time, their sense of fairness, and showing how those are undercut by some of these design tricks has actually been shown in studies to increase their motivation to take back some control. So talking about persuasive design is a really powerful thing that you can do. Another thing is you can ask them about their habits. Like, rather, we often go to our kids with what we think isn't working about our habits, but really get them in reflective mode and thinking about the habits that they have. And this is a real power move. Ask them first about the habits they feel good about. This is key. And then turn to those they wish they could change. So in our research, we often ask, what are some of your best tech habits? And are there any that you wish you could change? And then that sets the stage for next part that we often talk about, which is designing personal challenges or experiments to address a habit that you want to shift in some direction. And we've done a lot of work on creating tools that bring principles from habit science to this digital habit space. And we've worked with Common Sense in that curriculum that I mentioned earlier, developing things like something we call the digital habits checkup that scaffolds creation of a personal challenge. And there's really something in framing habits changes as experiments. It's not forever that you're going to do whatever you decide to do, but it's just for a week. You're going to try it out and see how it goes. That can psychologically be feel more doable and feasible. And it's interesting when we've had teens do these personal challenges, the things that they choose are actually fascinating. So some teens have devised challenges to help them curb or, minimize toxic comparison on Instagram, or excessive checking of their TikTok views and likes. But we've also heard from teens that they proactively want to use technologies in better ways, like use fitness trackers to track their steps or meet their fitness goals. So it's actually really interesting when you give adolescents an opportunity to reflect on their habits, to see what they choose that they want to change. And this is actually a fundamental shift from rules and lectures that focus only on limiting screen time. So it can be very powerful. The real goal here is to empower them, give them a sense of agency, both in choosing what habits they want to tackle and in designing experiments to see what might make a difference. And then finally here, we often talk about modeling over magic, and that really is the importance as adults of taking stock of our own habits and really thinking about what we're modeling. We often say that there is no magic wand that will wave away the impact of the habits that we model for our kids day in and day out when we become distracted by our own phones. So really thinking about what we're modeling and maybe joining our kids and designing an experiment for ourselves around things that we want to change. Okay, so that's digital habits. I want to move us forward to friendship dilemmas. This was another big topic. This highlights the reality that it's not just tech features that pull us into our phones, and that are the reason why teens are pulled into their phones. There are also social reasons. So we know from teens that there are tremendous relational upsides to technology, staying in touch, really nurturing their close friendships, but there are also significant pressures. We repeatedly heard from teens a sense that being a good friend is really complicated by connected life. And this comes up in a couple of different ways. For one, teens tell us they feel pressure to be always available, almost as though it's a necessity for protecting and preserving their friendships. So a few teen voices, again, really hit this point home. So a 17-year-old told us, I feel like if you're not connected, then the friendship will fall apart. And a 13-year-old said, if you don't text your friends for a while, they just come up with the dumbest excuse to cut you off. So there's this keen sense that disconnecting can mean losing friends. The feelings go in the other direction too. Staying connected is an essential part of being there for others. So another teen said, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings if I can't stay in touch with them. And a 14-year-old told us, my biggest worry is that I don't have enough contact with friends who are struggling, because I don't want my friends to do something bad just because I didn't respond in time to stop them from harming themselves or worse. This is one of the quotes from our research that really stopped us in our tracks. And, you know, we're all really alert to the reality that there's a mental health crisis unfolding among adolescents today. And when we talked to teens about this, we learned about a hidden side to it, which is how hard it can be to be good friends to those who are in crisis. So even if a teen is not personally struggling with anxiety or depression, they almost surely have someone in their network right now who is. And seeing messages at all hours or posts on Snapchat or Instagram like stories that signal distress but are hard to interpret raises a lot of puzzles about when and how to respond. So teens told us that this always on part that a friend can reach out 24/7 can sometimes be overwhelming. Being a good friend gets really hard. And that can be at, you know, in tension. That's a hidden side of a challenge for teens that can be in tension with parents saying, you know, I want you to just get off your phone. And they're feeling like, I really want to be there for my friend. There's a lot of hand wringing over the idea that technologies are eroding empathy without us realizing that it's a sense of empathy often that is keeping teens sort of next to their phones, and is it at the root of a lot of dilemmas that they feel. Even commenting on a friend's Instagram post can create pressures and puzzles. So 17-year-old Michelle told us that she wants to be authentic on Instagram, meaning she wants to be authentic when she comments on her friend's post. But she also doesn't want to let her friends down. So she told us about how this sometimes goes down. One day, she tapped a button to like her friend's picture, but she couldn't think of anything to comment. Almost immediately, like 30 seconds later, she saw a notification that her friend was typing a direct message to her. Her friend said, you didn't comment. She said, I'm thinking of a good one. And her friend's reply was, Kay, but can you do it soon? And then Michelle told us that then I have to comment like 3 times and it's very annoying and I get really nervous because I have to think of something really fast and it has to be something really good. There are definitely expectations to comment on posts. Michelle's story really captures friendship dilemmas that are at their heart about authenticity. When so much of posting is an expectation and over the top and immediate, we see in this case, like immediate compliments are the norm, being authentic can feel nearly impossible. And knowing what's authentic when you look at your own feed can be like reading the tea leaves. This is really hard. And of course, there are other friendship stresses and those that emerge from social tensions and even outright conflict. There's a lot of talk among adults about bullying and about cyberbullying, but we actually, when we talk to teens about topics related to social conflict, we heard that what they experience online is actually much more of a spectrum, and it runs the gamut from really blatant hostility on one end to super subtle jabs. It also includes a lot of things that are much more ambiguous. So this is important because some of what's stressful or recognized by teens as clearly mean can look completely benign to an outsider. If we looked at our teen's phone and we saw something that they feel as mean or really cruel, we might not get on the surface what's going on. So take the example of a teen who goes through and likes every single one of her peers' old social media posts. So When you hear about this, it might sound maybe neutral to positive, but aggressive liking can actually be a way that teen A is saying to teen B, I'm watching you, almost instigating or provoking a conflict. Or consider comments that actually look nice at face value, but are meant to be mean. So one of our teen advisors told us that when two girls have beef or have conflict, a comment like, oh my God, you're so gorgeous, I wish I could be you, might be offered through gritted teeth and really meant as sarcastic and downright aggressive. Again, things that we couldn't pick up on the context for. Then there are other salient features of social media that often stoke hurt feelings and conflict. So an especially relevant example that teens talk about is SnapMat. So this is similar to Find My Friends. It's a feature that shows where your friends are in real time, and monitoring this map can reveal that people are all hanging out somewhere and without you. And the same goes for other kinds of apps. So we hear about Venmo exchanges creating lots of hard feelings. Imagine you see that 3 of your friends just charged each other for a Dunkin' Donuts run or movie tickets, and you suddenly realize that they were hanging out and you weren't invited. So to be sure, the reality of being left out is nothing new. It was not created by social media. I certainly remember plenty of occasions when I was a teen in the 1980s of having these feelings. But this is to highlight that there are so many new kinds of social information for teens to scrutinize. And adolescents, again, are developmentally primed to really care deeply about this kind of social information and what it means for their friendships, what it means for their social standing, and their sense of self-esteem. Meanness can even take the form of cropping a photo to exclude a particular person before posting it, or tagging everyone in the picture except for one picture. Now, an adult might say, oh, I'm sure it was just an accident, if a teen even brings it up to us, but there are times when a teen knows it's not. Okay, final image is we have this pot of tea, and I imagine that some of you are well aware of the dynamics around spilling the tea or sharing gossip through social media accounts. So there are anonymous, what are referred to as tea accounts, and they're created for a number of different purposes. Some of them are used to circulate mean gossip, but they're not just mean-spirited. Tea accounts are also used for community-minded and even civic goals. We've seen them used by teens to report sexual assaults, to call out racism or sexism, to discuss policies in their communities that are controversial. But it's super complicated that this discourse about civic issues is often coexisting with malicious gossip on many tea accounts. Receipts, typically in the form of screenshots or screen recordings, often play a really key role in drama and conflict, and they regularly appear on many tea accounts as well. The culture of constant screenshotting and recording creates abundant evidence that can resurface anytime someone wants to put another teen on blast or criticize them. Okay, so I've shared a lot of layers of things that are hard and complicated. Let me talk for a few minutes about some things we can do to help. So one key is to simply acknowledge and recognize that spectrum I mentioned before when I was talking about meanness, that teens are navigating issues that span from stuff that is clear-cut bullying that we would all recognize as bullying to things that are much more subtle. And if we don't acknowledge that spectrum, we can end up minimizing anything that isn't on the super blatant end. And in doing that, overlook issues that are actually really painful for our teens. So acknowledging the spectrum is key. Another thing is, this is going to sound like really simple and high level, but simply creating and holding space for talking about what's hard can be really meaningful. And I'm going to loop back to this at the end of the talk. Adults may not get exactly how SnapMap and Snapchat or TikTok work, but we all remember the developmental needs to be liked, to have friends, to be a good friend. These are age old. And you can make a big difference by tapping into empathy and validating what's hard, saying things like, that sounds really upsetting, or I can see why that would hurt your feelings. In terms of social emotional skill building, we can also help teens build concrete skills to navigate some of the friendship puzzles they face. So one big one we heard from teens was around setting boundaries, helping them actually brainstorm language for when they want to disconnect, for when they need to disconnect and take care of themselves. How do you actually tell a friend that you're going to be unavailable for a period of time? What can you do or say if someone's texting becomes burdensome or their expectations are becoming suffocating in terms of always wanting a response? So to be honest, these questions are hard at any age. And you can probably relate if you've had a boss who emails you late into the night and you're not sure if they actually expect a reply, or a friend whose texting becomes overwhelming. It's actually hard to figure out communication that is effective, that is self-protective, but also aligned with the goal of preserving a relationship. And I can relate to this. I know that, your organization and the organization where many of you have your children involved focuses on teens who have particular needs. And I have one of my own at home who has a communication disorder. So really helping her brainstorm language that is authentic, language that she can have in her back pocket to set boundaries, to say things to others, has been really helpful. Okay, final topic, digital missteps, digital footprints. This is, a big concern for parents, especially flagrant missteps that are so commonly feared by all of us. Super understandable. We really care about our kids, and our sense of fear about them making a mistake that is digitally documented only spikes when we hear high-profile examples of digital content in the news leading to harsh consequences. So some examples here, that a couple of which we write about in our book. The would-be editor of Teen Vogue a couple of years ago was fired for racist tweets that someone tracked down from years earlier. Harvard University, my place of work, has actually seen multiple scandals related to students' online misdeeds. In one case from 2017, 10 admitted students had their offers of admission revoked after the admissions office discovered that they had posted deeply offensive speech on Facebook. And then just a couple of months ago, a 24-year-old tech company worker was fired for posting a 20-second TikTok. The content was actually benign, but it contained evidence that she had posted it during a Zoom work meeting, and that's the thing that got her in trouble. So consequences like these are why parents and schools expend a lot of time highlighting the worst case scenarios to teens. With the best of intentions, we warn teens that they should think before they post, that what they post cannot be erased, all caps, and that one misstep can get you kicked out of college, denied a job, and ruin your future. The trouble is, when we talk to teens about the digital footprint and about these messages, most of them know this, at least on some level. So let me share a couple of quotes. They're often aware, like this 13-year-old said, if you're young and make a post that the older you would regret, it's too late. Someone or something has already saved it and stored it. You have no way of deleting it. A 14-year-old told us, if you make one wrong move, you could destroy your life. And this quote really struck us. My morals will change over time, and I don't want to be affected by something I did a long time ago. So teens can be really alert to and genuinely struggle with the reality of an enduring digital footprint. At the same time, they're navigating normal adolescent developmental needs. As I keep saying throughout this talk, to develop their sense of self, they want to express themselves, they want to impress their peers, And they're doing all of this in a context where the things that they say, their digital artifacts, can be wrenched out of context, travel across space and time toward new meanings. This is super stressful. Plus, a teen's peers post and record things that they would never want online. So there's a certain layer of digital footprints that is literally out of their control, and even out of their control if they don't participate on social apps. All it takes is to be recorded. So what can we do? Digital footprints is perhaps our least favorite topic because we know they are so crucially important, but it's really hard to capture just snappy tips. They really fall short of how complicated it is. So I'll say a couple of things with a caveat that this is a really hard space. So one thing I'll say is that we advocate both warnings and wisdom, so a both and approach. So talking with young people, especially older children and younger teens, about digital footprints is crucially important. Talking to them about them from a risk perspective is so important. They need to understand, but we don't want our conversations to just begin and end with dire warnings. The stories we've heard from teens again and again show that simply naming the risks on repeat only amplifies their anxiety and offers little guidance about what they can do. It only just ups their blood pressure in a world where they feel like so much is out of control. So in addition to warnings, adults need to approach this topic with a bit of wisdom, especially in anticipating missteps. So wisdom about, knowing mistakes are going to happen. And when they do happen, acknowledging the impact of saying something offensive in a comment, even if it wasn't your intent, wisdom about making apologies and amends when they're due, and wisdom about learning from mistakes with a growth mindset spirit and really trying to move on. The other thing I'll say, and this is what the savvy strategies point on this slide is, that teens also need to be pragmatic. They may not be able to delete every trace of a misstep, but it's worth working to get things pulled down when they can and really using privacy settings effectively. We actually take inspiration from a lot of education efforts that help youth proactively manage their digital footprints in ways that uplift some of their achievements and try to delete things that aren't working well. But we also hear from teens themselves about how they use savvy strategies like private stories to segment their audience and create private spaces to share things. We also hear about teens creating pacts with other teens to vet content before they post it online. Agreements like, I'm not going to post a picture of you unless I clear it with you first. So some of those things are really powerful. Nothing is foolproof in a world where screenshotting and circulating is so easy, but these are some things that can be done. So I'm going to transition to my conclusion. I want to zoom kind of back out. Way back at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that we had a group of teen advisors working with us over several months to co-interpret our data. And this was a really important part of our process of trying to make sure that we were getting the stories right and really understanding the data that we saw. At the end of our sessions, when we were wrapping up our Zoom sessions across 6 weeks with our youth advisors, we asked them to share their final reflections using this prompt. I used to think, now I think. And I wanted to share a couple of reflections that really struck us when actually all of the teens responded in a very thoughtful way, but here are a couple of reflections that stood out to us. One teen said, I used to think that I was alone in my thoughts, but now I know that I'm not. Seriously, this has been really good. And the other teen said, I used to think that no one had a problem with social media and that everyone just saw it as this perfect thing. And now I know that, like other teens realize, it has problems with it. They just don't want to talk about it because nobody's talking about it. So what this told us is that hearing from other teens turned out to be really powerful, more than we could have even imagined. And so just having the opportunity to talk about some of the tricky parts of their digital lives ended up being an intervention for the teens who participated. This isn't why we recruited them to be on our advisory council, but it ended up being this incredible consequence. It taught us that how ready they were to connect with us, and importantly, with each other about these topics, and how meaningful it was to hear that they weren't alone in their thoughts. And so again and again, we've thought about, like, as adults, we can do more to convene youth in spaces where they can just talk about the challenges and do problem solving. We can convene them. Emily and I have spent a lot of time thinking about how our own thinking has changed as a result of this research and as a result of writing this book, and what we're going to do differently. And I just want to share one high-level idea that has really stuck with us as an important pivot and approach. And so this is a quote that came from an educator we interviewed who said, "I'm not interested," she was doing some lessons on sexting, and she said, "I'm not interested in just giving my students a definition of sexting, because that's not going to help them make a decision at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night." So a lot of tricky decision points happen when adults aren't around. And so we really need to think in our parenting and in education about how to open lines of communication so they'll come to us when they need us, but also how to help them develop the mindsets and the dispositions to make thoughtful choices at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, or really any other time. Okay, I'm going to return to the optical illusion. I started with the provocation that, as with an optical illusion, there's more than at first meets the eye when it comes to teens and technology. I hope that what I've shared this evening has helped you see more than previously met your eye. Thanks so much for listening, and for the folks at Tech Kids Unlimited for inviting me. And I believe now that Savannah and others are going to jump back on the screen to moderate some Q&A.
I have some questions. I want to say, Dr. James, oh my God, that was amazing and so clear and so interesting. And I think as parents, it's great to hear from like another parent researcher, like who's going through, and bringing up her, kids in the same era, that we are. I was really struck by that comment of like the student saying, like, "Are you going to respond to my post? Like, are you going to respond to the post?" And it was so interesting because it's like, now we are demanding so much more of our kids, right? Like they can not only go to school and, do the dish, take the dishes out of the dishwasher and hopefully, maybe walk the dog, but now they have like a whole nother set of responsibilities, and it's way too much. I mean, so my question is like, do you think that at this time with social media, right, the positive, the negative, whatever, this is the hardest time ever to bring up children?
Oh, great question. I don't know that it would be fair to me of me to make a big claim about in the history of life, this is the hardest time to be a parent, but yeah, it's super complicated to be a parent right now. It's super complicated because so much of what is happening is, as that educator said, out of our line of sight. 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, midnight on a Saturday night. But even when our kids are in the same room with us, there's so much that they're seeing on their phones that we're not seeing, even when we're looking over their shoulders, because of that sort of interpretive gap, that sort of spectrum I talked about. So it is a really difficult time for kids to be growing up. It's a difficult time to be parenting them. One of the reasons why I wanted to actually rest on this final screen and this QR code is a link to our book website, and it has a discussion group guide. And so one of the things that we have heard from parents is talking with other parents about their digital strategies can be incredibly powerful, because this is such a difficult time to be raising kids in such a difficult set of topics. We have heard from folks who've organized study groups to read our book, that the discussion group guide is helpful, but you don't even need to read our book. Come together with other parents and really discuss what are the things that are emerging for you, and exchange perspectives and advice. We really, just like the teens need to hear from one another, as parents, we need to hear from one another and exchange stories and really help one another navigate this world. And I think often, we get stuck in, I mentioned the coach versus referee metaphor. We get stuck in that mode, and I do it too, even as a researcher, of wanting to pull the device because it's so hard and it's so scary. And I have to check myself and say, like, that's not the way to build trust with my kid. That's not the way to open up those lines of communication and really, truly help them navigate a connected world that's not going anywhere. I hope that was helpful. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. If you have further questions, I had left my email address on the slide. I can also put it in the chat here. And behindtheirscreens.com, again, has information about the book, but also about the discussion guide. And best of luck to you all. It is hard to be parents in this world today, and I'm a researcher, but also a parent who's right along with you, puzzling day in and day out about some of these important moves we need to be making. Thank you for having me, Beth, for inviting me, and Savannah and Haley. I love the work that you're doing at Tech Kids, and would love to share it more widely with other families who really need some good supports for their kids.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to have you here today.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.